It's important to know that there's different paths to self-love. That state of unconditional self-love is actually the first step that we need to get to before we can create a better world. I once read this sign that said, "If you could be anything, be kind." Now, I was raised to be kind, but I didn't always feel good about it because unconditional kindness to others can actually be quite draining if it's not balanced with unconditional self-love and kindness to me. But I've never liked myself. I never fit in. I was a Vietnamese immigrant being raised in Victoria, British Columbia, which is a white community. I never looked or dressed or ate the same thing, the same as other people. And sometimes the Vietnamese culture can be completely opposite to the Canadian culture. So I would come to school and say or do things that other people didn't agree with. Or I would come home and say things that my parents didn't agree with. And my parents had a brother, had another son that is much younger, who was much younger than I am. And I had to raise him because my parents were working most of the time. So what was I? An adult with responsibilities? Because I also had to work from a very young age. Or was I a kid? And sometimes I would say things that are way too mature for a kid that age. And sometimes I would say things that are way too immature for somebody at that age. I never really liked the vehicle that I called me. And the ride or the journey, I didn't like either. A lot of my classmates would do their own thing and leave me alone. So I was isolated. When I came home, my father was always angry because he gave up everything to come to Canada. And my mom was always sad because she lost everything. So my journey or my roller coaster ride was always anger, sadness, anger, sadness. That was it. My mood was always one of those two. So my roller coaster sucked. Now it turns out there is a downside to not liking myself or my life. So I was raised a Vietnamese Catholic, and I was taught to always choose things that would benefit others. Now, when I did that, and they took advantage of me or they took things for granted, I would become resentful and angry. And then I would feel guilty about being resentful or angry. And that didn't feel very good at all. Ironically, I'm in a helping profession. So I didn't want to live that way, personally and professionally. So in the last few years, I've been on a journey to loving myself unconditionally. Now, around the same time as I was starting my journey, I met a person who, or I met a bunch of people who had lost their children. And they told me that the one thing that they regretted, besides their child dying, was that they didn't spend every single moment they could with the child when they had that opportunity. Now, when I go home and I take a look at my kids, they're so cute. I would feel this expansion of my chest and my posture and my face. It's a feeling of joy. But my whole life, I was raised with anger, sadness, and in my professional career, a lot of tragedy. So the moment I felt that joy in my body, I would think to myself, oh no, what if something happens to my son here? And that joy would immediately become anger or sadness again. After having talked to these patients who've lost their children, I said to myself, I'm not going to do that anymore. This is the moment that those people regret, so I'm not going to do the same. So no matter what I was thinking in my head, I said, no, I have this right now. So I allowed myself to feel that joy and to be present with my child. At first, I could only hold on to that feeling for about a second, but then it became minutes. And then now, after a few years, I can hold on to that joy for hours. And as I started feeling that, my journey no longer was sadness, anger, joy, sadness, anger, joy. It became sadness, anger, joy, sadness, anger, joy. So the joy no longer was a blip on my journey. It became a part of my journey. As I started to enjoy this journey more, I also started to like the feelings inside of my body. And because my body is a part of me, I started saying to myself that, I kind of like this vehicle. And the more I liked this vehicle, the more I got behind it and started rooting for it. And then I started to be able to love it. The journey to self-love doesn't have to be direct. I was always taught that in order to love myself, I needed to get to know myself by putting myself in different experiences and environments. Then I would have to like myself, find the things that I do or say or think that is nice. And then I would have to convince myself that I am worthy and deserving of love. But that path never really worked for me. Another path that I found was that I can find other things that I love. People, places, activities. And from that love of something else, then I could experience or pay attention to how that love feels inside of me. And then grow that love inside of me. And then once I'm able to feel that, then I'm able to connect it to my sense of self. Now, it's important to know that there's many different types of paths to self-love. Because if you're like me, the traditional path where you convince yourself that you're worthy and deserving of love doesn't work. But you can't give what you don't have. So that state of unconditional self-love is actually the first step that we need to get to before we can create a better world.